Hello, good afternoon, welcome everyone. My name is Alessandro Ruggero. I'm the director of the Istituto Italiano di Cultura in Toronto, and I'm very happy to present today to this third installment of the cycle of three meetings and webinars organized in collaboration with the Bocconi alumni community. As you probably know, we've been collaborating with the Bocconi alumni community in the past 3 years, and we had the opportunity to organize with them and to support them in organizing here at the Istituto several meetings with local managers and professors and people in the business community. Well, now we are all confined and we're all apart due to the COVID-19. I won't speak too much about that because everyone is quite tired about hearing about COVID-19. Nevertheless, we decided in a discussion with Paola, we decided to move to the online format and actually taking advantage of this opportunity also in presenting directly from Milan, professors from the Bocconi University. And we had 2 webinars in the past 2 weeks, and today we have the honor to have with us Paola Dubini. I'm very, very happy that we can host Paola Dubini, since Paola is dealing with something that is really creating a stronger connection with the mandate of the Istituto, since she will guide us today through the challenges and opportunities of digital art and in the digital ecosystem for art and after the COVID-19, during and after the COVID-19. So exactly what we are trying to do it right now. I won't say more about Paola and I leave the floor to another Paola, to Paola Flores, head of the Toronto chapter of the Bocconi alumni community. This meeting will last more or less 1 hour, including the possibility to have a Q&A session. You can use the Q&A tool that you can see at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions to Paola, and we can keep the answer for the end of the session. So thank you very much to everyone. Thank you again to Paola Dubini for accepting our invitation, and please, Paola Flores, in this case, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. As usual, thank you for the introduction. And thank you everyone for being connected today. Today we have the Bocconi alumni in Canada, but also in Italy and in Latin America and North America. We have also the friends from the Istituto Italiano di Cultura in Toronto. So welcome everybody. As said by Alessandro, it's our third webinar, and we have today Paola Dubini. Paola Dubini is a professor of management from the University of Bocconi in Milan, but she is also a researcher at the Art, Science and Knowledge Laboratory. She takes part to national and international meetings and conferences, and she sits at various boards, like, for example, the board of Palazzo Ducale in Mantua, the Fondazione Mondadori, and Lombardia Film Commission. So without any further delay, I want to introduce Paola Dubini to our conference today, and I hope everyone enjoys this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you to all of you for being here. I am happy, honored, and pleased to address the topic that I gave a title, Culture in Digital, because we started talking with Paola about digital art, and then we ended up really discussing about what is the relationship between culture and digital technologies. So basically, if we think of how we relate with culture as individuals, there are 3 ways of enjoying culture. We can look at culture as a product when we look at newspapers, at books, at records. we can look at culture as a live experience, and we tend to think about it when we look at performing arts, either classical music or concerts. But increasingly, live experiences has to do also with different industries. If we have group readings, if we have interactive museums, children museums, or things like that, we do have, in many instances, culture as a live relationship. That's also a way to enjoy particularly the immaterial aspect associated with culture. I forgot to say one thing, sorry. When I think about culture as an economist, I think about specific industries or specific fields. For instance, the visual arts, the performing arts, the media. But as a person, as a citizen, I'd rather take an anthropological way of looking at culture. So for me, really, my working definition of what culture is, and the way I like to look at it as an economist, is what makes us feel at home. Is really a fundamental element that helps us making a relationship with space, with time, and with other people. And I think that this is this anthropological way of looking at culture, even when we look at it with an economist eye, is much more interesting and important and useful than looking at it with the economist eye, which is fundamentally sectorial, industry perspective. So I will keep jumping back and forth from a variety of industries, and I really tried to find examples from different settings. So I was saying, our relationship with culture is physical, our relationship with culture is live, and then our relationship with culture is also digital. But then digitalization has created a whole array of different ways in which we can relate with culture. First, we can look at digital products. For instance, when we look at ebooks, ebooks are typically a digital product. Or when we look at Amazon, we look at it either as a digital channel for physical products or a digital channel for digital products. Then we have one of the characteristics of digitalization is the dematerialization of a variety of products and their transformation in services. And this has definitely happened in cultural industries. So we do see that companies like Spotify, Netflix, or Storytel give us the possibility to access to culture as a service, being it music, being it visual, or being it books. And then the possibility offered by dematerialization was the possibility of combining existing knowledge around culture to create new knowledge. And in this respect, I really believe that the archives have a lot to tell us about that. For instance, New York Philharmonic has been doing an incredible job in managing their digital archive and in creating, based on the know-how on the documents they had, and recombining, thanks to the digital the opportunities of dematerialization, to really reconfigure knowledge to create more knowledge. So, for instance, here in Philharmonic, I showed you a very interesting experience that the New Philharmonic website offers in combination with Google Arts and Culture to basically show the presence of Mahler in New York City. And another archive, talking a little bit about an archive that is in Italy, is the Archivio Storico Ricordi, that is about, as you know very well, Verdi and Puccini, that has been investing in the past year not only in digitalizing its series of its archive, but also using them as a way to create, for instance, multimedia digital exhibitions or different initiatives that start mingling the live experience with the physical archive and the live experience of an exhibition, for instance. The possibility of having content naked, culture naked in its digital form, allows also the creation of new digital products or services. So we have, for instance, podcasts, we have, for instance, esports, apps, are all very recent phenomena that have been a consequence of digitalization. And also, given the fact that a new setting, a new channel is created, this opens up the possibility of new ways of interacting with the specific cultural services. For instance, we know very well that one of the possibilities that has been opened up by Netflix is in watching. So what I'm trying to say here is that we are immersed in a situation whereby culture appears in several forms: physical, live, and digital, and each of them is somehow, somewhere, somewhat different, specific. Then there is another aspect that has been affected by digitalization, and this has to do with the possibility to engage with audiences. One expression of it is user-generated content. User-generated content has been there since day one. So we're not talking about something new in this case, but when digitalization occurred, user-generated content exploded. And YouTube, as you very well know, or Wattpad, are very clear examples of new places, new aggregators that did not exist before, and that made possible to create markets around user-generated content. Whereas in the past, these markets did not really exist, or if they existed, were really marginal and something really different from the mainstream. A very good example in this case would be vanity publishing. Whereas now, vanity publishing is, thanks to Amazon, fully embedded in the mainstream publishing industry. And this, of course, creates also some difficulties. Another very interesting example, and that's my favorite one, this is the one in the center, is a digitalization project carried by New York Public Library. That's called What's on the Menu. New York Public Library has a collection of menus from restaurants, and after they digitized the whole collection, they started creating a crowdsourced project asking people to help transform the pictures of the menus into a database of recipes, of prices, of restaurants in New York. And this transformation from physical to digital to a database has made it possible not only a different engagement between the library and his patrons and the community, but also the possibility to use this data and to create a different kind of analysis, research, and therefore to give a new life to a collection that in itself would be more like of a nice little thing. And in fact, it has now become a source of documentation. And if you look here, how many items, how many dishes were transcribed from the menus, which is what you can see in the homepage of this section, it's quite remarkable. It's quite remarkable. And then, of course, the last example is, I'm sure you're familiar with it, is that the engagement with audiences is not just in terms of attention or production, or in terms of giving new life to a specific collection, but also to transform the audience in some kind of ex ante financial supporters, and therefore sustain new productions, new and contemporary productions. Last but not least, of course, digital technologies are also tools for creating new art. So from digital art, here we have an example on, come si dice, fumetti, comics, cartoons, or illustrations, to different forms of the so-called new media art that basically takes advantage of the possibilities offered to art and to artists to create a new type of relationship with their audience, and therefore having their work of art be affected by the interaction with the viewer, as it is the case in the examples in the center. Or another interesting element is that digitalization has increased enormously the possibility to take different forms of expression, its forms, sorry for the typo, different forms of expression and mingle in several ways, as it happens in concerts, as it happens in DJ sets and things like that. Now, of course, all of this evolution, now, while digitalization was doing this to the cultural industries and the different sectors in different ways, the traditional parts of these sectors were also developing, as well as the live parts. So neither the physical world nor the live world nor the digital world have been working in a vacuum, but have been progressively sometimes mingling, sometimes clashing, sometimes integrating in some kind of a bumpy road, particularly if we look at it with the economist eye. Clearly, the relative size of markets, the relative mechanisms of value appropriation among actors in the different worlds has been going on, and not always in a smooth way. So here we have, I gave you 2 articles from the Financial Times. One is about Victoria and Albert Museum deciding to incorporate 3D printed digital art into its premises. So recognizing that video games, digital art are indeed contemporary forms of art, and therefore the first examples are worth staying in a museum of applied art as Victoria and Albert. So here, this is a nice example of a traditional institution that is embracing these new forms of art that were not contemplated in its boundary, in its perimeter when they started their activity, and so showing a way to embracing these new forms of art. And at the same time, so we do see that the cinema industry and part of the cinema industry is very much up in arms against Netflix, because Netflix made the traditional system of value appropriation in the cinema industry that works through windowing. First, you show the movie to the movie theater, then to the home video, then to different challenges in order to maximize revenues and profitability. Netflix changed all this because it came out with a business model that was global in nature, and therefore the traditional part of the movie industry has been resisting against Netflix, and Cannes has been denying Netflix to present his movie at Cannes, while Venice Festival welcomed Netflix. So that's why I use the term bumpy road. So it's not always different knots in these ecosystems consider themselves allies or complementary. Sometimes they consider each other enemies. So basically, so far, hoping that you're still alive, so far what I said are basically 3 things: that our relationship with culture is simultaneously physical, live, and digital, and the 3 interplay in sometimes positive, sometimes a little bit more competitive ways. The second message is that when we talk about digitalization, it's not something new. It's not something that new. I mean, okay, compared with archaeology, it's very new, but it is not something that new. It's been there for a while. And in some cases, it has been so much present in the life and the ecosystem where it belongs to. I'm thinking, for instance, to Amazon, that it has been very effective in completely transforming the industry. And then the relationship between the 3 forms is not always smooth. Okay, so that's where we stand. And then COVID. What happened to COVID, with COVID, to cultural ecosystems? The way I like to portray it is really through a domino effect, particularly if we look at it from an economic point of view. We really see a very delicate and tense situation, a very problematic situation that has created a little bit like a domino effect. Like, I don't know if you ever saw The Jungle Book by Walt Disney. there is this scene where there are all the elephants that are coming, and then one elephant stops abruptly, and all the others go and crash one on top of the other. That's exactly what happened to the cultural fields with COVID. The starting point, the starting block was live. Everything stopped. Here I'm talking about Italy, where, as you know, we had very serious problems early on with COVID. And so basically, some areas, my region, Milano area, started stopping things at the end of February. And then by mid-March, the whole Italy was considered red zone. And we fundamentally reopened a couple of weeks ago. And in some cases, particularly in Lombardy, a lot of the premises are still in the opening process now. So live culture stopped first, then physical culture got constrained, severely constrained, because of course the lockdown stopped also bookstores, stopped also any kind of physical activities. And because of this, it went backward to the industry chain, because bookstores stopped, there was no possibility to present new titles. All cultural industries are characterized by the fact that supply drives demand, and therefore there is a constant supply coming in. As live culture stopped and physical distribution became very difficult, what happened was that also the new releases were blocked and were postponed. And so that's why I talk about a, come si dice, domino effect. Then digital distribution boomed, but we'll see in a minute. Because first of all, digital distribution of physical culture was hindered. At the beginning, when bookstores stopped, Amazon, everything went digital. So Amazon started delivering books. I mean, Amazon took up the market share of physical bookstores. But because all the stores were closed, not only bookshops, Amazon started focusing on groceries and on a variety of products that people could not buy anywhere else. And so it actually stopped and reduced the service that he could provide for products that he considered second tier, like books. So physical bookstores in big cities had to reorganize their last minute, and they started to become digital distributors for the last mile. Or they would team up with newsstands to deliver books, because newsstands were considered essential, and so they would be open. So we saw that physical culture got constrained, digital distribution of physical cultural products was problematic. What really boomed was digital distribution of digital content. We all went digital. And digital distribution exploded, but somehow selectively. Let me elaborate on this. I'm talking about Italy. Radio decreased because people in Italy tend to listen to the radio a lot when they drive to work. as they were no longer driving nowhere because they all had to stay at home, radio decreased, but people who liked to listen to the radio from their offices or now from home would spend longer time listening. So radio experienced a fidelization. Music streaming, Spotify reduced its relevance for the same reason, for a similar reason that radio, because a lot of people, particularly young people, listen to music when they commute or when they go running, but people could no longer commute nor they could run. So music streaming stalled, but podcasts boomed because people were eager to listen for information, comments, opinions, all sorts of things. So podcasts boomed. Broadcasters boomed in terms of audience, but advertising collapsed because people basically started buying only food. I am exaggerating a little bit here, but actually advertising reduced, and because consumer spending were really focused on essential items. And so broadcasters boomed in terms of audiences, but couldn't monetize this boom into advertising money because advertisers were not buying. What really exploded was streaming video. So Netflix, when Netflix published its first quarter results, the share value of Netflix went to the sky, to the point that it is currently higher than that of Disney. How come? Also Disney offers streaming service through Disney Plus, and Disney Plus went very well, to the point that Disney Plus estimates to reach the goal it had, the targets it had, the commercial targets it had for 2024 by the end of 2020. So Disney Plus went extremely well, like Netflix. A lot of, if I remember correctly, Netflix declared 18 million new subscribers in the first quarter. So it's a huge number, it's a huge growth. The difference between Netflix and Disney is that Netflix is focused on streaming video, which went very well, so its results went very well, whereas Disney had streaming video that went extremely well, but theme parks and TVs went down. Theme parks because they're closed, and TV because of fall of advertising money. Esports, video games, all these things boomed, and digital news boomed, but not so much digital advertising, or at least not as much as it could have been in normal times, had the live and physical experience be going on. If we go away for a moment from the content and cultural industries to the other segments of the cultural world, we did see an incredible activity by cultural organizations. Cultural organizations such as museums, libraries, festivals, who typically were a little bit calm in developing a digital strategy, all had to go online. And they did an incredible effort in, I would say, in two directions. Direction one, how, in order to develop their backlist, their catalog, to valorize their catalog. And the other way was to try to do new original content to compensate for the fact that people could not go to museums, to festivals, nowhere, basically. So we saw digital events that blossomed, from new release of movies to festivals, to fairs, from the Torino Book Fair to the Basel Contemporary Art Fair. They all went digital. Libraries, in Italy, the digital lending in public libraries doubled, because libraries had to frantically offer e-lending for students, for instance, who couldn't go and buy books, or for regular library lovers who had difficulties in buying books and wanted to read something new. I'd say that I think the case of libraries is really interesting, because the platform for digital lending, for e-lending, was there, but really neither libraries invested in it so much, nor did publishers, nor did the users. So it was really a vicious circle. And now, because of the emergency, people had to wake up. And so digital lending increased, not only because there was a platform that people started, that users started using, but also because libraries started behaving a little bit more proactively. So they started saying, how can we ask the platform to work better? How can we become more user-friendly? What can we do? And so the results were quite interesting. I mean, it's true that the digital lending before COVID was very small in our country, unfortunately, but now it doubled, which is a good thing. And traditional cultural institutions such as archives and museums made several examples of archive valorization. Here I gave you two examples, one from Palazzo Te in Mantua, who really became a broadcasters, and part of it was material that had been produced throughout the years through their activities. Now they created this hashtag Sempre con te, playing on the double meaning of te as the name of the institution, and te meaning you in Italian. And the usual New York Philharmonic, which is really a very nice example of a digital archive, in my personal opinion, started producing every day something from their own archive in order to make the archive more visible. I finish and then I address your comments. Ciao Consuelo! I want to say hello to my friend Consuelo, who was my schoolmate, and I noticed that she has also written a question. I'll be with you in a moment. Let me just conclude. So did it work? I was talking this morning with to prepare for today with the Museo Naziona Scienza e Tecnologia in Milano as an example. They also did a daily program with every day one video and and some material that they published on their website and on the social media and on various social media. And here you can see basically what they did, and oh, I'm sorry, I found another typo here. So they published quite a lot of stuff, and they did all sorts of what I would say experiments. Experiments with new forms of content, experiments with different platforms, experiments in terms of topics covered. We all became broadcasters of ourselves. Now, I'm going towards the end, and I'm really opening up the discussion here. Okay, Italy now is reopening, and cultural organizations, not at all different levels, from artists down to distributors, are now trying to envisage the new normal, and are all very, very worried, because culture, what has been paradoxical in this COVID, particularly in a country like Italy, is that it has become evident how much we need culture. If we had all the culture that was given to us, we would have killed ourselves. We all opened up our windows and started singing Va Pensiero, and we all grasped to our heritage, and we were really touched by seeing our beautiful monuments in these super empty squares. I was in Rome yesterday, and I was making a comment with Paola. I was flabbergasted by seeing Fontana di Trevi with no tourists around, but you can easily imagine what this means for the economy of these industries. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. So, culture in all forms, COVID made it evident that culture is fundamental. But while recognizing this, COVID also killed so many sources of revenues for the cultural world. And the cultural world is extremely fragile. And so one big question is, will we remember how much culture helped us during this lockdown? And will cultural organizations be able to make us remember how fundamental they are? We all necessarily went digital because there was nothing else we could do. Will we stay digital? So all these incredible results, all the museums will tell you how they saw an explosion of content, of interaction through the digital. But part of it was because people was home, and that was the only thing that they could do. Now that they can go back to the sea and to the streets, will they still be willing to receive daily feedbacks from their museums? And if it is once a week, will they be so loyal? That's a big question mark. Cultural organizations made an incredible amount of experiments. Artists were incredibly generous. They really went digital very, very quickly. But everything was for free, or almost everything was for free. The monetization side was terrible. So already we are dealing with a tremendously unjust, unfair situation where artists are really not remunerated. And I sit in the board of CIAE, which is the collecting society in Italy. And during the emergency, we came up with a support plan for the members of CIAE. And the organization transformed all the food, the ticket restaurant for their employees into support for in giving food to the artists that had very serious economic situations. When CIAE came out with this offer, they immediately received over 1,000 requests, basically for food stamps. Another thing, cultural organizations made a lot of experiments, and you know, I speak for myself. I'm not in the cultural field. I am a university professor. I also went digital, and I started offering all my classes in digital form. I had never done it before. So as you can imagine, the quality of the delivery, I don't think was the same as if I were live. My students were very patient. They were very understanding, and we really tried to build a learning environment given the circumstances. But now, when we get to the new normal, how much more effort is needed for cultural organizations that have been making experiments to be still to receive still a tolerant eye or ear from their audiences. So are they competent enough? What is going to be the minimum level of competence that is required in order to be effective in their digital strategy, whatever the strategy? And then, of course, how to monetize, how to make it economically viable. The crisis was sudden and intense. The recovery will be slow. The crisis made cultural organizations more fragile than ever, and some are more fragile than the already fragile cultural organizations. So those who are the big museums that have, you know, Uffizi has 50% of its tickets come from international tourists. For 3 months, there has been no ticketing, and now for a few more months, there will be basically only ticketing from Italians. And because of the measures that are being put in place now, and because there are no tourists, probably you have 10%, 15% of your audiences. In economic terms, this is a disaster. Those that have a high fixed cost, which are the most important institutions. We all criticized MoMA that really immediately laid off people. But that's going to be extremely problematic for all the high fixed cost structures. A museum like Museo Egizio in Torino, which is probably one of the best managed museums in Italy, in my humble opinion, told me, the director told me, I mean, the situation is that I hope, I probably have reserves to get to November, but then I don't know what will happen. A lot of our cultural organizations are severely undercapitalized. And so now the rainy days are many. Those who did not invest in digital are frantically trying to invest in digital now. And so they have to develop learning economies. In some segments, we really, and particularly the live sector, I am particularly worried about the live sector, because the live sector is the one that fundamentally teaches us to socialize. And we have to reinvent socialization. And so they will definitely need to develop new formats, new ways of doing, because simply the old one will be in the refrigerator or in the freezer for a while now, and they cannot afford to stay still. I think that we need to that the way to get out of this situation that is very problematic, and this is the very last slide, and I'll be happy to address your very interesting comments that I was peeping in. I think that if we want, as we want, to have a lively cultural sector, the only possible way is to include culture in whatever agenda. And for me, a very important agenda is the Agenda 2030. I think it is extremely important. This is something that drives me nuts. We are, I think, the only country in the world that has not yet addressed the problem of how to send our kids back to school. We are reopening everything. We have closed schools and universities, but schools are more important than universities, because universities managed to go online. Schools went online, but the impact has been terrible. And so we need to have cultural organization to team up with the world of education and be one of the place where you learn. We have to transform ourselves into educating communities. Tough challenge. We need to have a stronger pact with the health system, because a lot of people experienced depression. A lot of people experienced very terrible personal situations during the coronavirus, and we cannot put them on Prozac, all of them. We need to have a stronger pact with the city administrators, so as to try to not only work on the safety side of living together, but also on the democratic side to live together. And we need to make a stronger pact with tourist-related organizations, because for a few months, our main tourists will be our residents or Italians. And there is a big jump to make in order to be able to compensate for all the tourists that are no longer there. So the challenge to link digital with live, with physical, is really to become much more diffused and present in everyday life. Because I like to conclude that we need culture like air. So thank you very much. And now I move to your Q&A. Is that right? Yes. So Christina says, do you think that after all this forced digital experience, we could expect an even higher desire and demand around the possibility to enjoy real culture? I hope, but the task is very big. I told you yesterday I was in Rome, and because there was so few people around, I played the tourist. And so I went back to Galleria Borghese that I had not visited in decades, simply because there was always too much people. Now it was virtually empty, and I was in line with a lady who said that lives in Rome, that was making exactly the same statement and saying, I have been waiting for 10 years to go back to my museum. So, Christine, I do hope that people will have an even higher desire for culture. The problem for cultural organizations is that we need a lot. They need a lot of them because they need to compensate for those who are, for those accidental tourists and accidental visitors that will simply have something else to do. Consuelo, how to solve the problem of compensation for content creators? That's very problematic. One of the reasons why the road to digitalization in content industries and in cultural settings has been bumpy is because it's the compensation issue for artists is already very tricky when you stay on the physical live part. On the digital aspect is problematic, not because necessarily it's unfair, but because in some instances there is a generation effect. I didn't know that Volare, Domenico Modugno, you know the song Volare, nel blu dipinto di blu, still makes approximately $300,000 in rights worldwide. But they don't come from Spotify, because the people who go to Spotify, that are for the vast majority younger generations, do not listen to Volare. So part of the problem is that the logic to monetize on Spotify are simply non-interesting for people that are over 50 years old or over 60 years old, or for artists that are dead. And so the issue of how to create value out of the digital world and how to fairly compensate authors is a big issue. I do hope what I'm trying to do for the little I can do is to do advocacy for culture, giving this idea that it's absolutely necessary to, it's something we need like air. When I say it's something we need like air, means, among other things, that we all have the responsibility to support culture. Because we always claim, I mean, in Italy, the budget by the culture ministry, I mean, the percentage of the budget, of the state budget that goes to the Ministry for Arts and Culture is 0.3% of the total expenses. So of course, the state has to finance the arts more. But it's not only the state, it's also the region, it's also the local government, it's also companies, it's also us, families. And that's why I say that we all need to put culture in every agenda. Otherwise, we will not be able to support the content creators. And this is paradoxically because it's precisely now that there is such a big change that we need new forms of content. We need cultural innovation as much as we could. We need to find new ways of doing performing arts, ballet, all kind of art. Practical examples of brands which can be considered in conquering a significant role in these up and coming digital ecosystems. Okay. I know that's a question that comes from Andrea. Good afternoon. I would say many companies have been teaming up with culture to try to mingle with to help move from the physical to the digital and to the live. I am thinking, for instance, of what Edison does with Teatro La Scala, or Fondazione Bracco is doing with its activities, trying to encourage people to use and access cultural organizations throughout all the different forms. There are some examples that are not that known, but have a tremendous return. I am thinking, for instance, at all the effort that Fondazione Garrone is doing. So it's actually the Garrone family in Genova that is doing in order to help the so-called rural areas, internal areas. They do all sorts of initiatives in the Appennini, in the mountains in the center of Italy, going north to south, to support entrepreneurial activities at that level. Companies like Illy, companies like Rana have been doing quite a lot. Do you forecast, this is Claudia. Claudia, do you forecast any revenues coming by the word crowd of potential public ready to pay small amount of money to broadcast? Digital game industry. Yes, now that's one of the areas where there is some debates and some experience. How can we develop something that is in between the game, the e-game, I mean the digital games, and or the paywall in newspapers. That is to say, small amounts of money being devoted to support the or to buy pills of content or broadcast pills of content. Right now, what has worked very nicely has been crowdfunding. Crowdfunding has been the most interesting examples. It requires a lot of effort, and I think that the positive element is that cultural organizations in Italy, who have been, I must admit, pretty lazy, now have realized that they have to develop a digital strategy, digital cultural strategy. So I do hope that after this first moment of this phase one that was so abrupt and such a tsunami, they will be able to come up and develop something. For instance, there has been Museo Diocesano in Milano, which is a very local museum. I mean, it cannot be compared to Brera, okay? He started offering virtual tours of the museums, that asking people to pay for them, claiming the reason why we ask you to pay for the virtual tour is because if it was a physical tour, if it was a real tour, we would use some cooperatives. And these cooperatives now are jobless. So they will do it online, but you need to help them. We all need to help them. And there hasn't been an incredible amount of people buying virtual tours of the Museo Diocesano in Milano, but there have been some, which really goes in the direction of what Rebecca is asking. She's asking, is it possible to create a concept of corporate culture responsibility? Yes, there is. And in fact, going back to the question that was asked before on Italian brands doing interesting examples, Lavazza has been doing a very interesting example of mixing physical, live, and digital around corporate culture responsibility. What Lavazza did was to involve 17 street artists to make huge installations in Torino. Lavazza is headquartered in Torino, on the walls of in the banlieue in Torino, each of them working on one of the UN SDG 2030 goals. And and of course, it sponsored, it paid the street artist. The street artist got an incredible visibility. It was a corporate social responsibility, leveraging on culture to affect the outskirts, some non-central areas of the city, and the sort of initiatives were developed at the local level with the local associations. So it has been a tremendously well organized example. I recommend you to go and visit that. Now, all this is the bright, to conclude with on a little sad line, what Bruno is suggesting. How does all this match with the last gloomy survey by Days, Digital Eco and Social Index? You are right. You are right. I want to be optimistic because I have to be optimistic. But it really depends on us. And I really am thinking that, for the cultural world, this is a very, very delicate moment. We will have a desertification, a cultural desertification. And if we have a cultural desertification, we are going to have a social desertification. And the social desertification, we are seeing already what is happening. We are seeing the problem. Culture is an antidote, and we really need to be aware of that. Oh, I didn't know that. I am commenting to Mr. Chiaramello. I didn't know you were the vice president of Lavazza Canada, so you were fishing for Lavazza, and it was. But I was really impressed by that initiative. I was really impressed. Monica, outside of Italy, the global perspective affects the perception of the country. Yes. Yes. The more distant a recipient is, the more disinformed he or she might be. Since we are embracing remote teaching, I am looking forward to accessing all cultural sources which will become available. This should be embraced as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. I absolutely agree with you. I think that we really need to imagine the cultural world much more ingrained and much more teaming up with the school world, definitely. I think that we need to find ways of making cultural offering from a distance, as emotional, as involving, as giving a learning opportunity to our students as it could be live. A few years ago, I saw an experiment that was made by RAI. RAI bought the rights for some Italian artists, I mean, like Caravaggio, like Leonardo da Vinci, and created so-called impossible exhibitions, whereby they would make a one-by-one reproduction, high-resolution reproduction that would be retro-illuminated to give some kind of a son et lumière effect, so a little bit tricky, but that could be organized as an opera omnia of an artist that could be much more accessible. I was speaking to RAI and I was asking them a few weeks ago, why don't you take that high resolution digitalization and make it available digitally for high quality services online? There is a big question, Monica, to complete my answer though. Who pays for it? Who pays for it? Because this is definitely one road to go. And honestly, there was a very nice research that was made in Oxford by Oxford University on open data. They collected some of the images of some very famous international museums. They took the digital reproductions and they reprinted with the original size of the painting from that image to see whether, and then made an exhibition with that, these researchers in Oxford, explaining what were the policy associated with the digital reproduction of that specific piece of art. The results were incredible because you could see that some museums had a digital strategy, some had no idea what they were doing. One of the museums that is more forward-looking in how to manage the rights associated with their collection and what to do with that, and how to handle open data associated with that, is the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. He has been doing all sorts of extremely interesting experiments, but there is a long way to go. But yes, Monica, I totally agree with you. We really need to think of audiences in a truly global perspective. And this is what the digitalization could do. I think I'm late. I'm sorry, Paola. I'm late.
No, it's perfect. A lot of interesting questions and interesting presentation. Thank you. So I think we have no other questions. So thank you, Professor Dubini, for being with us today. It has been really emotional to see all of that, and also to listen to you and to our increasing desire to come into Rome, for example. Because
absolutely. I after yesterday, honestly, it's been incredible. I mean, yesterday has been the first time I went outside Milano since end of February. So I had my first trip out of Milano since February, and I went to Rome because I wanted to see the exhibition of Raffaello at the Scuderia del Quirinale. I was so impressed by seeing Fontana di Trevi in all its splendor that I decided the next weekend I want to go to Venice. So I really hope that all my co-Italian, all the Italians will really be willing to go get their heritage.
And we are more than ever today.
So we wait for you. We all wait for you.
Yeah. So thanks again. We will be back. We will be back as soon as the borders are open. So, but thank you everyone for attending today. And again, stay connected. We finished today our series with Paola Dubini, but we will continue to plan for the fall. So enjoy the summer, but stay connected with us. Okay. Bye. Ciao.
Thank you very much, Istituto Italiano di Cultura and Alessandro for
yes.
And of course, thank you, Paola. Thank you, the chapter from Bocconi Alumni, and thank you to all for your patience and a very interesting question. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you again.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.